The rebel ship, the Dawn's Fury, shuddered as it made its way through the asteroid field, the hull groaning under the strain of the constant evasions. Captain Zaranella stood at the helm, her hands steady on the controls, but her mind was elsewhere. They were so close now, so close to unlocking the key to humanity's salvation. If the legends were true, if the ancient texts were right, the Crusader, the one figure capable of changing the course of the war, was waiting for them in the cold heart of this forgotten sector. The sensors beeped urgently. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She looked to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Orin Hale, who had been monitoring the scans. His expression darkened. "Captain, we're not alone," he muttered, eyes locked on the monitor. Zara's pulse quickened. "Do we have time to get in and out?" "No," Hale replied grimly. "The Empire's scouts are closing in. We won't have more than 5 minutes once we reach the facility." 5 minutes. Zara exhaled sharply, her thoughts racing. If they didn't retrieve the Crusader now, they might never have another chance. They had no choice. "Prepare the extraction team," she ordered. "We'll make this quick." As the Dawn's Fury cut through the dense asteroid field, Zara's thoughts turned back to the data they had uncovered. Ancient military records from Earth, records buried so deep that only the most resourceful of rebel agents could even hope to find them. Within those files were references to a facility deep within this sector, a place where the Crusader had been hidden away after the fall of Earth. The hero who had once been humanity's symbol of hope was lost in time. But now, if they could awaken him, perhaps they could turn the tide of the war. The crew worked efficiently, their urgency reflected in their every movement. They had done this countless times: raids, rescues, escapes. But this time, there was something different. Zara felt it in her bones. The Crusader had been their last hope when the alien empire had crushed their world. And now, in this forgotten corner of space, he might just be their only hope once more. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace, the small rebel shuttle deployed, its engines firing with controlled fury as it sped toward the surface of the facility. Zara's eyes fixed on the data screen, tracking their descent. The surface was littered with debris, remnants of forgotten battles, and the atmosphere felt eerily still, as though the place had been abandoned for centuries. The shuttle landed with a heavy thud. Zara and her team disembarked, weapons raised, scanning the area. The facility stood before them, a cold, lifeless structure, its dark metal panels gleaming under the harsh light of distant stars. The ground was cracked and uneven, scattered with bits of broken technology. The air smelled stale, thick with the remnants of old machinery. "We need to move fast," Zara whispered, nodding for her team to follow. The silence was unnerving, the only sounds being their footsteps and the faint hum of their scanners. Inside the facility, time seemed to stand still. Rusted corridors led them deeper into the heart of the structure, where they finally found what they were searching for: a cryo chamber, encased in a protective shell, its display flickering weakly as it indicated the long-dormant life support system. Zara felt a surge of hope, but that hope was short-lived. "Captain," Hale's voice rang out sharply. "We've got company. The Empire's scouts. They'd found us." Before Zara could react, a loud crash reverberated through the halls. The sound of approaching boots echoed, heavy and deliberate. The Empire was here. "Wake him up, now," Zara commanded, her voice sharp. Hale rushed forward, inputting the emergency activation code. The cryo chamber hissed as its locks released, and the pod began to open, revealing the pale form of the Crusader, his once mighty frame now brittle and still. But something inside Zara twisted with uncertainty. The Crusader had been Earth's greatest hero. What if he was no longer the force they needed? What if time had eroded not just his body, but his mind and spirit? The answer came as the lid of the pod slid open fully. The Crusader's eyes fluttered open, his gaze sharp, his posture commanding as if no time had passed at all. And just like that, the legend had returned. The Crusader's eyes snapped open, his breath sharp and ragged, as if the weight of the galaxy had settled upon him in an instant. For a moment, his body was still, suspended between two worlds, the cold, dark void of his exile and the fire of war he'd left behind. Then his muscles tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon that had been with him through countless battles. But there was nothing. Only the sterile cold of the cryo chamber's walls. Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, distant, as if it had not been used in centuries. Zara knelt beside him, her eyes filled with a mix of awe and urgency. "We're the last of humanity's resistance," she said quickly. "I'm Captain Zoranellis. These are my people. We've come to awaken you, Crusader. We need you to help us fight back." His gaze flickered toward her, and for a moment there was nothing in his eyes but confusion. The long years of isolation had dulled the fire that once burned in his heart. But then, like a spark reigniting, something flickered deep within. The look in his eyes shifted, familiar, purposeful. It was the same look he had worn on the battlefield. "Humanity," he whispered, the word feeling like a memory that had nearly faded. "I remember. But why am I here? What happened?" Zara hesitated, unsure of how to begin. She had read the legends, the stories of his triumphs, his sacrifices. But nothing could have prepared her for the man before her. Was he the same Crusader who had fought against impossible odds? The one who had stood against the alien empire with unwavering resolve? "The war," she began slowly, "the one you fought. It didn't end the way we thought it would. The empire, it took Earth. We've been scattered, exiled to the edges of the galaxy. But there are still pockets of us left, and we need you, now more than ever." The words seemed to stir something deep within him, though his face remained expressionless. His eyes drifted to the walls of the facility, as though trying to piece together the remnants of his past, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. "You've been in cryo-sleep for centuries." Hale spoke from across the room, his tone harsh. "The Empire wiped out Earth, scattered humanity like dust. We thought you were lost forever." The Crusader's gaze turned cold, his mind working to connect the fractured memories that surged through him. Flashes of faces, battles, the faces of those who had fallen by his side. His fists clenched at his sides as the images became clearer. "The betrayal," he murmured, as though recalling a distant nightmare. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." Zara leaned closer, her voice firm but gentle. "It wasn't your fault. The traitor, the one who sold us out, he's dead. But the war, it's still going. The Empire controls the galaxy, and Earth is a ghost. We need a leader. We need you." For a long moment, the Crusader sat in silence, his brow furrowed in thought. The war had been lost. Earth had fallen, humanity scattered, and he had been left behind, exiled to the farthest reaches of space. But hearing Zora's words, something inside him stirred. A sense of duty, a calling he couldn't ignore. "I never wanted to leave them," he said, his voice low, strained with guilt. "But I was forced to. Now I understand. They are still out there, and if I am to return, it will be as their champion once again." He stood slowly, his body aching from the long years of stasis, but there was a strength in his movements that belied the physical toll. The time for self-doubt was over. The time for regret had passed. "Then let's go," the Crusader said, his voice now firm, resolute. "Let's bring Earth back." As the rebel crew scrambled to prepare for the perilous journey ahead, Zara watched the man who had once been their greatest hope, now reborn from the ashes. The fear of what had become of him, of the man they might find, began to fade. He was here, and he was ready. But she knew that the path ahead would be far from simple. The alien empire would stop at nothing to extinguish the flame of resistance. They had underestimated humanity once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The Crusader had returned, and with him, the hope of a galaxy. The Crusader's presence was like a spark in a dry forest. Within days of his revival, Whispers of his return spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Rebel cells that had once been fragmented and isolated began to unite under his banner, rallying around the one figure who had once led humanity to victory. His name, once forgotten by most, became a symbol of defiance. Zara watched with a mixture of awe and apprehension as the Crusaders stood in front of a small gathering of soldiers on a derelict moon base. His figure, though worn and gaunt, still held the weight of authority he had once commanded. Every word he spoke carried the resonance of a leader who had seen the horrors of war and still, somehow, found the strength to fight on. "We are not just rebels anymore." The Crusader's voice rang through the crowd, his deep tone carrying the weight of years spent in exile. "We are humanity's last hope. Every day that we survive, we show the Empire that we will never be broken. Earth may be gone, but we are not. And as long as we still breathe, we will fight." The soldiers, young and old, human and alien, erupted into applause. But the Crusader's eyes were distant. His thoughts were already elsewhere. He remembered the faces of those he had failed, his comrades, his people. The alien empire had taken so much from him, from humanity. But there was something else deep inside him, a fire he hadn't felt in centuries, something that drove him forward. "Captain Nellis," the Crusader said, his voice quiet now, almost hesitant. "I need to speak with you." Zara stepped forward, her brow furrowed with concern. She had seen the way he looked at the stars, lost, haunted. Despite his imposing presence, there was a shadow of doubt in his eyes, one that had not been there when he had led humanity's armies. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I remember Earth," he said, his gaze distant. "But I don't remember the people. I don't remember their faces, their names. The memories are like fragments of a broken picture. How am I supposed to lead them back if I can't even remember them?" Zora placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the present. "The people don't need to be reminded of the past," she said gently. "They need to know that there is a future. You don't have to carry the weight of everything alone. You've already done more than anyone could ever ask." He met her eyes, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. The pain of his exile had been worse than anything he had endured in battle. But here, with these rebels, these survivors, he could see a new beginning. His heart, once heavy with loss, began to beat with a purpose again. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "We don't need to dwell on what was lost. We need to fight for what is still possible." Their brief conversation was interrupted by the shrill sound of an alarm echoing through the base. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the dim lights flickered, casting shadows across the walls. "What's happening?" Zara demanded, her eyes already scanning the monitors. "Hailstorms detected in the outer perimeter," Hale said quickly, his face grim. "It's the Empire. They found us." The Crusader's face hardened, the old instincts kicking in. "Prepare the fleet," he commanded, his tone returning to its former strength. "We're not running anymore. It's time to show them what humanity can do when pushed to the edge." Zara's heart swelled with a mix of fear and excitement. The time for hiding was over. The Crusader had returned, and with him, the fire of rebellion. Earth's defenders were no longer scattered and afraid. Now, they had a champion, and they would fight like never before. The Empire's scouts were closing in, but the Crusader would not be caught off guard again. He had waited long enough. And now, humanity would rise. The rebel fleet was already in motion as the first waves of Imperial ships descended upon the base. The ground trembled with the force of their approach, and the air was filled with the hum of engines and the clatter of weapons being readied. Captain Zora Nellis stood at the helm of the Dawn's Fury, her mind racing as she watched the fleet's positioning unfold on the holographic display. The Crusader was beside her, his figure now clad in battle armor, the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders with every step he took. His presence filled the command deck, the tension in the air palpable as the crew prepared for their first real clash with the Empire since his return. "Ready the strike fighters," Zara ordered, her voice calm but resolute. We can't let them get close enough to send reinforcements. Hale's voice crackled over the comms. Strike fighters are ready, Captain, and the sabotage teams are prepped. We'll hit them hard. The Crusader turned to Zara, his expression unwavering. This is the moment we've been waiting for. We show the Empire that humanity will never be crushed, that we are a force they cannot ignore. Zara nodded. She could feel the truth of his words deep in her bones. The Empire had made a grave mistake by underestimating humanity, by thinking they could simply erase Earth's legacy. Now they would see just how wrong they were. The dawn's fury emerged from the moon's shadow, a sleek black silhouette against the stars. The rebel fleet followed, forming a loose formation as they sped toward the Empire's approach. The Imperial ships were formidable, massive, heavily armored, and bristling with weapons, but they were not prepared for the sheer unpredictability of the human resistance. Enemy ships on our radar, Hale reported. The lead cruiser is massive. This will be our toughest challenge yet. Zara's eyes narrowed as she analyzed the data. The Empire's flagship, a colossal warship, was advancing at full speed. It dwarfed the rebel fleet, but there was one thing they had in their favor: speed and agility. The Empire relied on overwhelming force, while the rebels had learned to fight with ingenuity. Prepare the fleet for evasive maneuvers, Zara commanded. Get close, but don't engage until we have an opening. The fighters launched in rapid succession, their engines roaring to life as they broke formation and streaked toward the enemy. Zara's hands were steadied as she guided the Dawn's Fury toward the enemy's flank, her heart pounding in time with the ship's pulse. Target their weak points, the Crusader said, his voice low but full of conviction. We can't take them head-on, but we can destroy their shields and strike at their power cores. The battle began with a deafening roar as the first salvo of fire from the Imperial ships hit the rebel lines. Explosions ripped through the empty space, sending debris scattering in every direction. The Dawn's Fury dodged and weaved, evading incoming fire while delivering devastating bursts of return fire. The rebel fighters darted between enemy vessels, firing precision shots at the Imperial ships' weak points. Zara's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold in front of her. The Empire's massive ships were slow to react, their shields flickering under the intensity of the attack. But they had the numbers, and that was a problem. A cruiser's weapons fired at the Dawn's Fury, its beams slicing through space with deadly precision. Zara's fingers flew over the controls, pulling the ship into a hard roll just in time to avoid the hit. We need to take out their flagship, Hale called out. If we destroy their command ship, the rest will fall into disarray. The Crusader's eyes hardened as he watched the battle unfold. He had fought many battles, but none like this. The stakes had never been higher. He turned to Zara, his voice low but filled with purpose. Take me to their flagship. Zara hesitated for a moment, uncertainty creeping in. It'll be risky. You'll be facing the full might of their forces. He met her gaze, and for the first time since his awakening, the full weight of his past seemed to come alive again in his eyes. If we don't take that ship down, we lose this fight. The Empire won't stop until every last one of us is dead. Zara nodded, her decision made. Then let's end this. The ship's engines roared to life, and they rocketed toward the heart of the battle. Zara's voice rang out over the comms. All units, focus fire on the flagship. We're going in. The time for hesitation had passed. It was all or nothing. The tension was unbearable as the Dawn's Fury streaked toward the heart of the Imperial fleet. The flagship loomed large ahead, a behemoth of steel and fire, its shields shimmering with energy as the Imperial forces poured everything they had into the assault. The rebel fleet had already engaged in a desperate struggle, fighting to hold their own against the overwhelming might of the Empire. But it was the Crusader they had come for, the one who could tip the scales in their favor. Zara's hands flew across the controls as the Dawn's Fury danced through the chaos, narrowly avoiding enemy fire. Every move felt like a calculated risk. Too many shots had already grazed the ship's hull, and the shields were beginning to flicker. Enemy cruiser closing in. Hale's voice crackled over the comms. We've got incoming fighters. It's a full assault. Hold them off, Zara replied, her voice steady. We're getting to that flagship, no matter what. The Crusader stood beside her, his expression one of quiet determination. His eyes were locked on the massive warship, his mind already calculating their best approach. There was no room for error. If they couldn't break through its defenses, they would lose everything. Captain, the Crusader said, his voice firm, I need you to pull the ship into their blind spot. Their shield generator is vulnerable on the port side. I'll take care of the rest. Zara's gaze flicked to him, her heart pounding. You're sure? The flagship is heavily guarded. You'll be in the line of fire. He met her gaze without hesitation. This is the moment. We can't hesitate. If I'm going to do this, we'll need to hit them with everything we have. She didn't need any more convincing. She slammed the controls forward, the ship lurching as it cut through the battle at full speed. The Imperial cruisers in their path fired relentlessly, but Zara's expert maneuvering kept them at bay, the ship weaving through the beams of energy and explosions like a dancer avoiding the clash of blades. Ahead, the flagship's blind spot grew larger. The Crusader's eyes sharpened as they approached the massive vessel, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. He could already feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, a battle-honed instinct rising to the surface. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for humanity's future. We're in range, Zara said, her voice tense but resolute. I'm opening a firing lane. The ship's weapon systems hummed to life, releasing a deadly barrage of fire at the Empire's flagship. The powerful blast struck the flagship's shields, but they weren't enough to breach its defenses. The flagship retaliated immediately, its massive turrets swiveling toward them. But the Crusader was already moving. He grabbed a blaster from the compartment beside him, his movements fluid and imprecise. He turned to Zara, his gaze fierce. Keep them off us. I'm going in. Before she could respond, the Crusader had already sprinted toward the nearest shuttle bay. He didn't wait for her permission. He couldn't. If they were to succeed, it would be on his terms. His footsteps echoed through the halls as he suited up in the battle armor that had once been his second skin. His mind was focused only on the task ahead. The flagship must fall. Zara watched him go, a knot of worry forming in her chest. The Crusader had always been a leader, but this mission was different. He was no longer just a figurehead of hope. He was the key to humanity's resurgence. The rebel forces, inspired by his return, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and hope. Rebel ships surged toward the flagship's weak points, but Zara knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. The full force of the Empire was upon them. Take care of him, Hale said grimly over the comms. If we lose him, we lose everything. Zara's jaw clenched as she turned back to the controls. She couldn't afford to think about losing him. Not now. Not when they were so close. The Crusader's shuttle launched into the depths of space, a lone figure racing toward the enemy's heart. As he neared the flagship, the enemy forces closed in, but he was undeterred. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in centuries, humanity had a real chance. The shuttle zipped through the vacuum of space, rocketing toward the heart of the Imperial flagship. The Crusader's pulse thrummed in his ears, a steady beat driving him forward. There was no turning back now. The fighter ships that had swarmed around the massive vessel were quickly becoming irrelevant, too focused on engaging the rebel fleet to notice the lone figure heading straight for the enemy's heart. The flagship loomed ahead, its immense size dwarfing everything around it. It was a fortress in space, a symbol of the Empire's unyielding control over the galaxy. But for the Crusader, it was nothing more than a target. His shuttle systems blinked as it powered through the atmosphere of enemy defenses, his mission clear. He would infiltrate the flagship, disable its core systems, and bring the Empire to its knees. No more hesitation, no more waiting. The shuttle's sleek form slammed into the docking bay of the flagship with a violent jolt, but the Crusader was already on his feet before the final impact. The door hissed open, and he stormed out, weapon raised, eyes scanning the dimly lit corridors. His instincts, honed over years of battle, took over. The familiar weight of his blaster in his hand felt like home. The silence of the flagship's interior was eerie. It was a vast, cold structure, its sleek metal walls devoid of any warmth. He moved swiftly, navigating through the darkened hallways, following the faint hum of the flagship's power system. His mission was simple: infiltrate, sabotage, and escape before the Empire knew what hit them. His first encounter came in the form of a squadron of Imperial soldiers. Their armored forms appeared out of the shadows, weapons drawn. The Crusader didn't flinch. Without hesitation, he fired, the blast from his blaster cutting through the air like a lightning strike. The first soldier crumpled to the ground before he even had time to react. The others fired in return, but the Crusader's movements were swift and precise. He darted behind cover, returning fire with ruthless efficiency, cutting through the Imperial forces one by one. In mere moments, the hallway was silent once more. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. He had no time to waste. He moved onward, deeper into the flagship, each step taking him closer to the heart of the Empire's power. Meanwhile, back aboard the Dawn's Fury, Zora's focus remained on the battle outside. The rebel fleet was holding strong, but the situation was precarious. The flagship's shields were holding, and without the Crusader, they had no way of breaching the vessel's defenses. "Captain," Hale called out, his voice tinged with urgency. "We've lost contact with the Crusader. He's on the flagship, but we're getting no comm signals from him." Zora's throat tightened, but she steeled herself. "He'll be fine. He's done this before. We just need to hold out." But she couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. Every second without word from the Crusader felt like an eternity. If something happened to him, if he didn't return, the rebellion would crumble. They had come so far, and the price of failure would be unimaginable. She turned back to the battlefield. Their fleet was pushing forward, but the Empire wasn't backing down. The flagship's massive guns fired once more, this time hitting one of the rebel cruisers directly. The explosion was blinding, sending ripples through the space around them. Zora gritted her teeth. "We can't hold this off much longer. We need that flagship disabled." As if in response, a series of blinding explosions erupted within the flagship. A tremor shook the entire ship, and alarms began blaring across the comms. "We've got a breach," Hale shouted. "It's coming from the inside." Zora's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. "He did it," she breathed, a surge of hope rising within her. The Crusaders in. But the fight was far from over. The flagship was already retaliating, but the rebellion's resolve had been reignited. With the Crusaders' sabotage, they had a fighting chance. Zora squared her shoulders, her determination resolute. "Push forward. We're finishing this." The Empire's fortress had been breached, and humanity's champion had struck at its core. Now, there was no turning back. It was time to reclaim the galaxy. The tremors reverberated through the flagship as the Crusader made his way deeper into the heart of the vessel. The explosions had caused widespread chaos, but he knew the Empire's forces would regroup quickly. He didn't have much time. The corridors had become a maze of flashing lights and blaring alarms. He moved swiftly, dodging patrolling squads, disabling automated turrets, and using the shadows to his advantage. His blaster was now a familiar extension of his arm, each shot carefully aimed and precise. He had taken out countless Imperial soldiers, but the real battle had yet to come. The core of the flagship was heavily protected. Ahead, the doors to the central control room loomed, guarded by a squad of elite soldiers. They hadn't seen him yet, but he could sense their presence, hear their hushed voices as they waited for a command. The Crusader pressed himself into the shadows, feeling the weight of his next move. He had been in worse situations, but something about this felt different. Every step forward meant taking a risk, not just for him, but for the entire rebellion. The seconds seemed to stretch as he took in a breath, steadied his hand, and launched himself into action. The first soldier fell before he even knew what hit him, and the others scrambled into position, but it was too late. The Crusader was already in motion. With every shot, he brought down another, their bodies hitting the floor with heavy thuds. The remaining soldiers hesitated for only a moment, but it was enough for the Crusader to close the gap. Within seconds, the last of the guards were down. The doors to the central control room slid open, revealing the heart of the Empire's power. A series of massive consoles flickered in the dim light, humming with life as Imperial officers scrambled to respond to the unexpected breach. The Crusader didn't hesitate. His weapon flashed, taking out the central command officer before the man could even draw his weapon. The remaining staff reached for their emergency buttons, but the Crusader was already there. With a quick motion, he disabled the communication systems, cutting off the flagship from the rest of the Empire's fleet. The control room fell into chaos, but the Crusader stood firm. He was the eye of the storm, moving with purpose, dismantling the flagship's critical systems one by one. His hand hovered over the main power core. This was it, the moment that could change everything. But as he reached for the controls, a voice echoed through the room. Cold, authoritative, not so fast. The Crusader turned, his hand instinctively going to his blaster as a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, imposing officer, his armor gleaming in the low light, stepped forward. The Imperial officer's face was concealed behind a dark helmet, but the presence he exuded was unmistakable. The Crusader's muscles tensed. He had been expecting this. The Empire had never sent its best lightly, and this man was clearly their best. He could sense the weight of their confrontation. This would not be an easy fight. "Commander Kalen," the Crusader said, his voice low, filled with quiet recognition, "I should have known they would send you. You've always been one step behind me, haven't you?" The officer's voice was calm, yet dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but a relic, Crusader, a faded memory of a dead resistance. The Empire is eternal, and you are the past." The Crusader didn't respond. Instead, he took a step forward, his hand tightening around his blaster. This fight, he knew, was inevitable. But it would not be the end. The Empire had underestimated humanity's resolve before, and they were about to make that mistake again. With a sudden, swift motion, Kalen lunged toward him, drawing a blade that gleamed with cold precision. The Crusader met him head-on, their weapons clashing in a flurry of sparks and fury. Back outside, the rebel fleet continued its assault. The Imperial flagship's shields were beginning to buckle under the pressure, but they still had no way of knowing how close their victory was. The battle raged on, but every passing second brought them closer to the moment when the Empire's greatest weapon would fall. And the Crusader, in the heart of the storm, would be the one to bring it down. The room vibrated with the sheer intensity of the fight. The Crusader moved with lightning speed, his every action driven by purpose and years of combat experience. His blaster met the deadly blade of Commander Kalen with a sharp crack of energy. The two warriors circled each other, each one determined to come out on top, knowing the stakes could not be higher. The air between them crackled with tension. This would be the final moment that decided the fate of the galaxy. Kalen's eyes narrowed as he pressed the attack, his blade slashing through the air with deadly precision. The Crusader blocked each strike, but the force behind Kalen's blows was formidable. The Empire had poured its resources into creating soldiers like Kalen, men and women whose loyalty to the Emperor was unshakable, whose training was unmatched. But even Kalen could not stop the inevitability of change. The Crusader's muscles burned, but he didn't let up. He could feel the rebellion's hopes and the promise of freedom on the line. Every strike, every move was a step toward victory, not just for him, but for humanity. He ducked under Kalen's next swing, his blaster firing in a quick, fluid motion. The shot grazed the side of Kalen's helmet, But the commander was quick to recover, his own blade flashing through the air in retaliation. "You can't win, Crusader." Kellen sneered, his voice cold. "The Empire's power is beyond you." The Crusader's eyes blazed with determination. "I'm not here to win for myself," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm here for everyone you've crushed under your boot. For the billions who've suffered." Kalen's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you can bring them all back? You can't undo what's been done." With a roar, the Crusader closed the gap, his blaster firing again, this time striking the power conduit that ran across the room's central hub. Sparks flew, lighting up the room with a violent glow. The force of the explosion knocked both men back, but the Crusader quickly regained his footing, eyes fixed on Kalen as the commander staggered to his feet. The battle was not over. The Crusader could feel the control room systems starting to collapse. The core was vulnerable now. Just a few more seconds, and the flagship would be crippled. He had to finish this, now. Before Kalen could recover, the Crusader charged forward, faster than he had ever moved. In one swift motion, he closed the distance between them, knocked the blade from Kalen's hand, and slammed him to the ground. The commander gasped, disoriented, as the Crusader pointed his blaster at the heart of the flagship's main power core. "You've lost," the Crusader said, his voice steady, unwavering. "The Empire will fall. Humanity's fight will never be extinguished." Kalen's eyes burned with fury as he struggled to stand. "You're a fool," he spat. "The Empire will crush you." But the Crusader didn't flinch. He pulled the trigger. The core exploded in a massive burst of energy, shaking the very foundation of the flagship. The force of the blast sent a shockwave through the entire vessel. The lights flickered, and alarms blared as the flagship's systems went into overdrive, struggling to maintain power in the face of catastrophic failure. Outside, the Imperial fleet faltered. The flagship's shields collapsed, and the once unbreakable vessel began to disintegrate under the weight of the rebellion's assault. Imperial ships attempted to retreat, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. The Empire was crumbling, its once iron grip on the galaxy slipping away. Zora's voice crackled through the comms. "The flagship is going down, Captain. We've got them on the ropes. The Empire's fleet is scattering." The Crusader stood amidst the wreckage of the control room, breathing heavily but victorious. He could feel the weight of the battle lifting. His mission was complete. As the flagship slowly disintegrated in the distance, the rebel fleet continued its charge, pushing forward with renewed strength. The Empire had been dealt a blow it could never recover from. The Crusader looked at the wreckage around him, the devastation he had caused to the very heart of the Empire. He didn't feel triumph, though. Instead, there was a deep sense of duty fulfilled. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Humanity had risen again. The galaxy would remember the day the Empire fell, the day the Forsaken Crusader returned to lead them to victory. And in that moment, the Crusader knew the galaxy had been forever changed. The rebellion had succeeded. The Empire was no more.